Radio TV phono nut here, and we have another one of those cheap 1930s TRF series string radios. This one here is a Plamor brand, although this one may be a little bit more upscale than some of the others in that I think this one has a dial light and it actually uses a ballast tube rather than a resistance line cord. Here's the rear of the chassis. We can see something missing here, probably a filter capacitor that was long ago removed and replaced under the chassis. Here is the tag on the rear of the chassis. Made in USA by DR Company, Detroit. That would mean Detroit Radio Company. And then it says here Plamor model D something another. Factory number something, I can't make that out. And then Western Auto Stores. Now, generally speaking, True Tone was the house brand for Western Auto, but back when this was made, I want to say there were two different Western Auto outfits. I think one was based out of Kansas City, Missouri, and the other one was based out of California, so I don't know really what the deal is on this, but let's get it apart and see if we can make it sing again. Only one screw left holding the chassis, so whoever serviced this thing in the past was a bit of a slob. Dial bulb, it just fell out of the back of the radio. Top of a tube shield likely went right there that also fell out of the back. Here we are with the chassis removed. You can see not much to this. It's pretty spacious under here. A lot of solar seal tight capacitors, and here's our 1940s era replacement electrolytics. Yeah, 20 microfarad, 150 volts. Back in the 40s, these were considered a midget size, but of course in today's world I could probably fit a half a dozen or more newer capacitors inside of this container that this old one is housed in. Now, since this has octal tubes, I'm going to place this, well, it has a mix of octals in the older style, so I'm going to place this around 1936, 37, somewhere around in there. This was made not too long before they introduced the more familiar series string tube lineup, as in 50L6, 35Z5, 12SQ7, 12SK7, and 12SA7, and of course when that lineup was introduced, that made it no longer necessary to use things like a ballast tube or a resistance line cord, because the new tube lineup, the heater string and series, added up to approximately the incoming AC line voltage. Alright, we had the power cord replaced with one from my junk. I found a grommet. It could stand to be a little bigger, but this is an old motor mounting grommet for a phonograph. I'm using that in here to protect the cord from getting damaged on the chassis edge. I'm sure originally this had a rubber grommet, but obviously it's long since deteriorated and fell apart and disappeared. And we have our knots tied in the power cord to keep it from being pulled out or pushed up into the radio, and as well to try to help retain that grommet. Alright, now we're going to take our meter, measure for continuity across the power plug, and see if we get anything. Alright, 207 ohms. That's good. That means we have a good power switch and we have continuity through our ballast tube and heater string. Alright, we're going to do something a little bit unconventional just to change things up a bit from the normal routine that we usually use. I have the ballast tube removed to eliminate the filament string. I've substituted the rectifier for a 1N4007 diode that we have temporarily tacked in. We have the radio plugged into the dim bulb tester, and then we have the dim bulb tester plugged into the variac. We're going to start this at 0 and watch the B+. and try to reform these old capacitors if we can. Now, if they're totally dried out, then that's probably not going to be possible. But like I said, something a little bit different. Alright, the radio is turned on and the variac is turned on, and we're at 0 volts. And now we're at 2 volts with very little AC input and climbing. That's those capacitors charging up and reforming. I'll bring the AC input up a little more. I'll stop the camera and let this stabilize. I won't make you watch the whole process. I think it's about stabilized at 5.9 volts. Let's go up a little more on the AC input to the radio. Let's see if it'll make it up to 10 volts. Come on, you can do it. You can do it. Go on, you can do it. There you go. Now the reason for the light bulb is to offer some current limiting. If something were to short, this light bulb would take the brunt of it, and you would notice it if the light bulb starts glowing brightly, which of course nothing's going to glow when I'm only putting in, less than 10 volts coming out of the variac. But once we get it up to a higher voltage, that light bulb will be more important. I'm raising it up now. Let's take it up to about 15 volts of B+, and then watch it from there. And then we'll just let it stabilize, and then I'll go up a little more. Now I find it comical, these people that get on eBay and pay hundreds of dollars for those newer Heathkit condenser testers to do the same thing as what I'm doing. You can do it a lot cheaper with a DC voltmeter, an incandescent light bulb, and a variac. You can get those items a lot cheaper than paying hundreds of dollars for one of those condenser testers. Now, would I trust a 70-plus-year-old reformed electrolytic condenser? No, I would not. But for having fun and goofing off, we can reform it and see what happens, or try to reform it. Alright, we're up to 25 volts B+. Let's crank the AC input to the radio up to, let's get it up to about 35 volts B+. And then, of course, as we're doing this, we're feeling the condensers to make sure they're not getting warm to the touch, and they are not. Alright, up to 38 volts B+. Let's crank the AC input to the radio up a little more. Let's get it up to about 50 volts B+. There we go. Let it do its thing. Alright, about 90 volts B+ with about 65 volts AC input. Alright, 110 volts B+ with 80 volts AC input. Actually, probably a little less than 80 going into the radio, since we have the bulb in series with the radio. And at 100 volts AC input, we have almost 135 volts B+. So we're now going to kill the AC input to the radio. and then we're going to put the ballast tube back in, and then we're going to crank it up, see what happens. Well, I'll pull my diode rectifier out, my solid state diode rectifier out. Alright, we're back to the tube rectifier. The ballast has been reinstalled to enable the tube heaters. The variac's set on about 70 volts. Radio is plugged into the light bulb. Let's turn it on and see what happens. And of course, with a tube rectifier, it'll take a little while for the tube to come into emission. So I will kill the camera while that takes place. Alright, B plus is starting to slowly climb at a whopping 3 volts. So we'll just let it do its thing for a few minutes. Alright, at 47, 46, 47 volts B plus, we're already getting some activity, so that's a good sign.
They're not incentivized to steer people to a specific plan. They truly care for the people that they're dealing with, and they can offer them so many choices.
All right, let's crank the AC input up.
To find a solution and to find guidance during this. It's a questionable time when people are seeking out new Medicare plans, and they do need some guidance. And AMAC's Medicare Advisory Service have gotten worse. All
right, at 115 volts through the light bulb, we only have almost 65 volts of B plus, and it really should be about almost double that. Well, I just moved my ground. This is one of those that has a common positive filter capacitor, and I believe the field coil and possibly some resistors are in the negative side of the filter capacitor, and I believe where I actually have my meter clip now is actual B minus, and we have 90 volts B plus, which through the light bulb, that's probably about right. Okay, without the bulb and with the meter grounded to the right place, we have about 115 volts B plus, and that's about what I would expect. And with no more antenna than we have on here, this was doing pretty good. This really needs about 25 feet of antenna to be satisfactory. And even at that, this is basically a city radio. This is not going to be something for long distance use. I'm getting ready to put a better antenna on this, and yeah, I like that big capacitor. I presume that's a mica capacitor that's for the antenna isolation, but it might not be. You never know. Yeah, where the insulation is flaking off of this, it was almost ready to short out to this hold down clamp, which of course if that would have happened, it would have just killed reception completely. Alright, I replaced the antenna wire with one a little bit longer and cleaned up the chassis a bit and cleaned up the tuning condenser. We're tuned to 1450, which is a bit usually hard to get on these types of sets because 1390 is so hot it runs over on top of it. So that tells us this radio must be a bit more selective than some of these cheaper TRF sets that we've encountered. So that's 1450, 1390, 1010, and 910. No 670 though, but I wouldn't have expected that. Now, if you've noticed, other than the rotten power cord and the rotten antenna wire, I have not replaced a single part in this radio to get it working. I will check the control grid of the audio output tube, because chances are that cap's leaky and will need to be replaced. Alright, we're about to check our control grid voltage on the audio output tube with respect to cathode, which in this case is tied to chassis, because that's where they have the chassis. This is configured so they have the Okay, get my head on straight. Needed to cough, and the dog distracted me, but the way this is designed,
sided with good old
they're getting the bias voltage
New York Attorney General Tish James
from the chassis here. The chassis is not at B minus, and we have negative 11 volts.
With financial institutions.
So that's not too bad. All right, a better way to check this is to pull the grid end of the capacitor loose and then make sure there's no DC pass-through. There'll be B plus on this side, and there should be no DC on this side. So, and if we see DC pass-through, then we have a leaky capacitor. And as it was warming up, it jumped up to like 2 volts, and now it's dropping back down to 0.1 volts. Now, as I was taking this capacitor loose, the plate end came loose because someone obviously replaced this at some point, and they just laid the lead over the terminal and soldered it, which makes me think this radio was probably recapped sometime back in the 40s with these solar seal-tight capacitors, and for their day, those were good capacitors. But as you can see, we've settled down to there's basically no DC pass-through here now. Now the reason they had this just laying on top of the terminal is because had they hooked it on, there wouldn't have been enough room for this to stretch over here, so I added a little pigtail to that. And you're probably wondering, why don't I just change it? Well, I'm in the mood to make you, all you compulsive cap changers, wet your diaper today. Now, actually, my mentor, whenever I was growing up, that taught me some of this stuff, he swore by these solar seal-tight capacitors. And like I said, for their time, they were decent capacitors, but I have seen some in today's world that were leaky and some that were even shorted. But I've also seen a good many of them that were still in better shape than a lot of other comparable brands of paper capacitors, so I may just leave this alone and we'll just see how long it goes. Now these electrolytic capacitors have some liquid that has long ago leaked out of them and dried up on them, but they're obviously still working. Alright, I've got the radio plugged in through the dim bulb, and we're just going to let it run a while just to see what happens. So basically all we've done to resurrect this was replace the rotten power cord and the antenna lead, and as a precautionary measure we reformed the filter capacitors. That plate to grid coupling capacitor, it showed a little DC passage as the power supply was warming up and as the capacitor charged, but then it bled off and really wasn't passing anything, so we put it back in circuit. Now, to do this right, we would need to recap this, go through and check all the resistors and replace any that are out of tolerance. But I'm not in the mood to do that today. I just wanted to resurrect this and get it going, and I'll probably use it periodically to see how long it goes, and then when something happens to it, then we'll open it up and take care of it then.
I was in that photo. I was.
All right, we're back together. The cabinet needs some work, including a date with the clamps and the wood glue. Needs a dial bulb. One of these decorative speaker mounting bolts is missing.
A little bit today, because if we don't get to everything, it'll be on our bonus podcast, which
and
today,
right now it's playing pretty good
at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's called Overpromised. So whenever Rich overpromised.
No 670, not this time.
No?
And no AVC in this radio either.
I don't have time for it on this show because, The tragedy Tuesday night was the latest to hit Iraq's Christian minority, which has dwindled to a fraction of its former size over the past decade in the face of militant attacks. More details at srnnews.com. I'm Keith Peters reporting. Bring it in. Bring it in, Jason. He has some solid points as to why he's not a fan of this whole story.
Now, after dark, we will give it a band scan and see if we can receive any distant stations.
On FSR, where to begin? I think maybe where we left off yesterday, because I feel like Ramos had a loss of a level. Webb and Stevens. Call them at 601-483.
Like I said, this is just a resurrection.
Professional staff.
If this was something that I was going to release to anybody, it would have received a full going over. But if it blows up on me, then that's on me.
Credit Union. Stop by and see them at
and the consequences may not be as bad as if I passed it off to somebody else and it blew up on them.
And a member of the...
But his peers in the NFL to shoot deep. Shoot deep. Go deep. He said Kelsey was the Steph Curry of shooting deep with a...
And another thing I did was that original filter cap was missing. I just dug around and found an old dud capacitor. Not even the right value of what's supposed to be in there, but at least it's something to put in the hole and make it look better.
A Travis Kelsey, why not go after the Taylor Swift? If you are Russell Wilson, back in the day, who better than a Travis Kelsey? Yeah, he went after Sierra back in the day.
All right, we're outside. It's after 9 p.m. Lighting is virtually non-existent.
President Trump's leadership, they have more money in their
Let's see if we
wallets.
can get any out-of-town stuff on here.
Enforcement
The man this year right now in baseball.
That's probably 870 WL.
But he is playing on a major discount.
Listen, I think this is the thing. It really does factor into modern day, and you do a great...
It's rated with the Better Business Bureau. Call now.
There's WSM, no mistaking that. So if it'll get that, then it'll be satisfactory.
29 of us, $29.90. Signing. Get some EV action in 2023 Nero EV Wind SUV. 253 miles of EPA estimated range. $269 a month. 40. We're cute. All right,
just doing get up.
That's probably WDIA.
for choosing us of American-made furniture. Does face it. All the candle switch stuff. How's nothing changes there? Our team. Exorcism on that locker room training just yet.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not as good as a decent 5-tube super het, but for what it is, it does pretty good there.
Some of my buddies in the league.
That's 1450 local, and that sounds like maybe 1280 trying to come in.
You know, they're years away from being competitive, and the idea that they're going to be competitive.
Like I said earlier, these TRF sets are not all that selective.
So it's going to be like you pretty much. Could you come up with a list of 6 people, 5 people?
Or maybe that was 1390 coming in under it.
Interesting. Because Matt Eberflus is out.
And another thing I think I failed to mention about these, the volume control is actually not in the audio circuit. It's actually in the first, the only RF amplifier stage. It controls the gain of that cube, and there is no AVC.
Reagan Library. We've got a lot more issues to cover and a lot more questions to go. So let's dive right back in. We're here in California, where gas is nearing $6 a gallon. Oil is close to $100 a barrel again. To help you choose the coverage that works for your auto, home, and life insurance. By Explore St. Louis. Learn all about the great things to do in St. Louis. Visit ExploreSt.Louis.com. By Central Bank, the hometown bank of the St. Louis Cardinals. By the
a lot of just taking shots at Trump, and it's interesting that you have this Swamp's candidate that are talking about a lot of things.
We're giving you the top 4 jams. Sit back. Right here on Praise 95.9 FM, 910 AM. Make some noise if you love the Lord. White Sox 3-0. Marlins 11-2.
I'll turn it all the way up on this low end. There's nothing local that's gonna.
Nationals 5-1.
It's going to overpower us.
Send tax to 55% of the administrative state. Reduce the federal employee headcount by 75%. Rescind 50%. So we're distributing almost all security bonds.
Your source for advanced traffic.
It takes quite a while to clean all that.
Brought to you by the Cool Ray Lifetime Parts and Labor Warranty.
95.5 WSB and Lattice News and Talk.
W Rockets in the WSB 20.
The city was going to end fossil fuels. They've been working overtime to do that ever since. If I'm President of the United States, we're going to open up federal lands.
If that was WSB, that's probably
all of the above energy
720.
And I have a plan that actually would not only reclaim energy independence.
I think it's 720 WGN or is it 740?
The leading energy producer on Earth. I believe in the next 10 years with the right policies.
To create opportunities and move on them faster. Bank of America.
So it becomes tradable. All of those contracts are.
20 was 60, afternoon high 82. 66 degrees and higher on 64 degrees in Gainesville and 64 degrees in Braselton. More news at 11 o'clock. Breaking news when it happens. I'm Jennifer Griffiths, 95.5 WSB.
Sean Hannity, sponsored by AquaGuard.
What you don't need is a president who is against energy independence. Ron DeSantis is against fracking. He's against...
We're going to choose Midland over Moscow. We're going to choose the Marcellus over the Mullahs, and we're going to choose Bakken over Beijing, and we are going to look. Voters enacted a constitution. Responsible for a legitimate.
All right, well.
Is because life is way more expensive than it need be. But for Biden attack,
I guess that's about all I've got for this radio. And
gas-operated vehicles.
let me remind you, I haven't replaced a single capacitor in this thing yet.
With the disaster at the southern border.
Now, how long it'll work in this state?
These problems.
I have no idea.
Of the day during the last administration. Hence,
right now, it's working pretty good.
Makes all the sense.
Well, this one I just picked up off camera. Identified themselves as 790 the Bat, and they mentioned something about St. Louis Cardinals, so I assume a sports station out of St. Louis.
You like mommy's, since they lucky to have been born in America, and I think being the first president-elect
he was able to join Jerry on stage. Then the announcer said he's playing for Yodely Guy's favorite place to visit, and it's a trip to Switzerland. So, Sheldon wins the game, but then Terry...
2 decades. The fact that Deion Sanders has rejuvenated Colorado Buffalo.
Okay, so I will leave you with WSM tonight. Hope you enjoyed this and hope you got something out of it, and more to come a little bit later.
Minnesota on the 25th of September back in 1943, talking about Joe's son. He started off as a radio promotion and was working for Rotation Records, which started that one
Okay, so it's going to fade out. I'm sure it'll come back though. Alright, I had said earlier that I thought this radio might have been recapped back in the 40s. I don't know why I didn't catch this before, but looking back at my video footage, there's a possibility it might not have been recapped. And the reason I say that is this capacitor here is the plate-to-grid audio coupling capacitor, and you can see it has a smooth end, but the rest of the capacitors in the radio have recessed end caps. And there's one on here, even though it's not in the clip, that has a metal band on it that is soldered to the chassis. So I'm thinking all of these older capacitors with the recessed ends are probably originals, and this audio coupling capacitor is a later replacement. And I'm sure that capacitor was probably replaced at the same time that the electrolytic filter capacitors were replaced. Now, when that was done, who knows? I think solar was probably out of business by about 48, 49, somewhere around in there. But from what I've read and from what I've been told, a lot of those old solar capacitors remained on the surplus market for decades after the company folded. So on that note, somebody could have replaced that capacitor in the 70s or 80s. You know, who knows? Same goes for the electrolytics. But like I previously said, in order to do this right, all these need to go, but I'm just going to leave it as it is right now and just see how it does and see how long it lasts. And with this set not having a power transformer, even if something dead shorts, it's not like it's going to blow up something expensive. At the worst case scenario, it will either blow up the rectifier tube or maybe the audio output tube, depending on what shorts, and it's really no big deal. Those tubes are not that expensive. Now, on the subject of these old electrolytics still functioning, it's been my experience that the ones that are actually in an aluminum enclosure with a cardboard outer jacket like these are often still work to some degree. It's the cheaper variety of capacitors that are in some kind of potted material that just die in short order. So when these were new, these were of better quality, and even though I wouldn't trust these too far today, I still find it a bit amusing that we have 70-plus-year-old electrolytic capacitors that are still functioning, yet I often see modern-day electrolytic capacitors that are only a few years old. They're obviously made in China. I don't think there's any made in USA electrolytic capacitors anymore. If there are, there's some what I call some expensive boutique variety, but what I'm getting at is I see equipment that's less than 5 years old with puffed up, blown up electrolytic capacitors in them, but here we have these that are 70, 75 years old, if not older, and they're still working. But like I said, if this was something that I was going to be passing on to somebody, it would get a proper overhaul. But for my use, for my enjoyment, I'm not really worried about it at this point. And I'm running low on some cap values right now anyway, so for the time being, I'm going to only be replacing capacitors that truly need it. Alright, that's about all I've got for this. Hope you got something out of it, and we'll do something else a little bit later.